Jim and Haley, welcome to the Way of Champions. Haley, welcome back, and Jim, welcome to the podcast for the first time. It's an honor to have you both on.
I'm very excited to join you, and I hope I can make a contribution to your audience. But I'm very excited to have the opportunity to be with some people that I have deep admiration and respect for.
Well, thank you for that. That means a ton. And Haley has already made a big contribution to our audience a year or so ago when we had her on. And Haley, I want to maybe just start with you. After we talked, you said, "Have you ever had Jim on? You need to get him on." And we've tried to make this happen for a while. Why did you say that? What's your relationship? How far back do you guys go?
Well, Jim, Dr. Loehr, I don't even know if you know this, but I chose my career. I wanted to be a sports psychologist since I was 12 years old. But when I was 17, I graduated high school early and I was starting to go into university to start my career. And I have this vivid memory of me sitting at my parents' cottage in one of those like ski tubes reading a book called Stress for Success by Dr. James Loehr. And I then followed Dr. Jim Loehr's career, and he co-founded a company called the Human Performance Institute. And it took me many years, but I finally got the courage to call that institute and ask to be a coach. So Dr. Loehr is one of my key mentors, one of the sports psychologists that I wanted to be. So I am so thrilled to be here with, as I was saying, all my J's. John, you and I become friends. Jerry, as again, someone who I have looked up to and followed in the world of sports psychology, and then also my key mentor, Dr. Jim. So thank you for having me.
What a nice statement. That makes me feel a little teary-eyed to hear you say that. You never know the influence you have on people, but it's always wonderful to hear. So thank you, Haley, very much for that.
You've taught me so much.
Hmm. Well, we talk, Jim, we sign off every single podcast with this idea that your influence is never neutral. And every time you walk into a room, you leave an impact, and it's either positive or negative. And
All
being
right.
aware of the influence you have really is what, greatly affects how powerful that is. And Jerry, I want to let you ask the question because you and I were talking before we started here, just how influential Jim's work and some of his books have been on you. So why don't you take it away?
Well, Jim, it's a pleasure, and we're going to sing each other's praises for a long time here, the whole group. But I never thought the day would come when I would be sitting with you talking about important things. And I have known about you and your work. I've read several of your books, and they've inspired me. And but more than anything, it's where we're at in our life right now. And you're a person. Uh, there's a ton of people now, Haley, as you know, floating around, and I say floating around because I don't think they know where they're going yet. But in sports psychology, but there's a few of us left who have been at it a long time, and after 45 to 50 years of me hanging out in this rarefied air, I just feel like it was such a pleasure to be able to sit here and talk with someone who's had that influence on me as well. And uh, so I'm excited, and you've done such amazing work in the field. And what I really love is you're you're very humble about it. And you're not there looking to take all the credit, and you're open to being vulnerable and being silly and whatever. Uh, if I'm taking you wrong, you correct me because that's how I'm seeing you.
No, for me, that's a big compliment. I value humility. My biggest concern is that, I've had, like you, Jerry and John and Haley, I've had so many incredible opportunities to be around so many incredible people. And I say it all the time, when I'm in that environment, I'm sure they bring more value to me than I do to them. That I have a lot of experience, but every athlete that I've worked with, every team, and Jerry, the number of teams you've worked with is just absolutely stunning. And every one of them points to this extraordinary impact that you've had. But I'm sure you feel as well that every time, no matter how many times you've been in that arena, you continue to find new insights. And my greatest teachers were the athletes that I had the opportunity to be around. And I feel so grateful. I know so many people would have loved even to sit and for me to sit and observe how you work with all your teams. This magic you bring, which probably is encased in one word more than any, and it's your new book. It's love. I mean, you bring joy, love, kindness, and we end up in the same space of character, which for me is another affirmation that, two guys that have been around for a long time, and John the same, we're kind of fighting for the same space to be opened up in people's lives, that it really isn't the achievement that matters most. It's who you become as a person as a consequence of the chase and what you bring to every arena. When we say bring your best, so much of it is bringing your best emotionally to which is really hard in a lot of situations. So, Jerry, your career is amazing in terms of the number of people that you've worked with. And just, I think I first ran into your work when you were working with Monica Seles, correct?
I wish I could say yes, but I
Well, I read an article that said that they thought you were one of the people involved with it. You influenced her progression.
okay, okay.
And
Yeah.
I everywhere I turn, I see your name. So I thought, and I worked with Monica for years as well. She's one of my absolute favorite people of all time, such a wonderful human being. So, I have great respect for what you've done and the impact you've had on sports and team sports in particular.
hmm hmm
Hmm.
You said something about gratefulness, and I want to pursue that a little bit. It's a very important word for John and I in our teaching. And I have a moniker that says, speaking of monikers, that says, from grateful to great.
Ah,
And Jim and Haley, I don't know if you have the same experience, and I know John does, but all of the great athletes and all of the great coaches, the icons, the people I really admire, the Dean Smiths, the Mike Krzyzewskis,
yeah,
all these wonderful, amazing people, and the athletes too. We're going to be interviewing on our podcast next week, Shane Battier. What talk about human beings?
right.
Unbelievable. One thing I notice about these people, they're all grateful. They're grateful. They can really step
Mm.
back and say, you know what, I've been given a gift. You talk about me and my work, and I talk about you and your work and all of our work. Aren't we all grateful? I mean, I consider myself a hole, a mere hole in the flute of all these giants that I have an opportunity to be with, yourselves included. And all I do is I just open up that hole and all the wisdom comes out. And it looks like me, but honestly, it's just stuff I've adapted from all these great people. And that brings me back to the word gratitude. And I think we need to talk a little bit about that. I know you've worked diligently to help others raise their awareness about how success is directly related to that. Can you help us discuss that a little bit, you, Haley, and see what we can take that?
Do you want me to start or let John or Haley start? I'm happy to open that up.
Whoever.
Well, I spent, like you, I love science. My father was a civil and petroleum engineer, brilliant, maybe the most brilliant man I've ever met. And he was very disappointed when I went into psychology because he said, "That's not a real science, Jim. What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm not, I mean, I was good in math and all that, but I said, I'd really like to do something different. And he said, well, I only have one request, and that is I'd like for you to take a scientific approach, whatever you do. And I'd like for you to build it, if you would, around the notion of energy, because energy is physics, it's chemistry, it's the way the world works. So I made that commitment, and I think before my father died, he was quite pleased, even though I think he would have preferred that I'd gone into some engineering or something in that space. But one of the things that I've at the Institute, we were called the Human Performance Institute, and we tried to ground everything in a research base. And and when it came to gratitude, I decided I was going to do a deep dive into that. And I did a podcast and an entire podcast on just the science, not just what's nice to hear, but where there are refereed studies, at least one and maybe many more that show the impact that gratitude can have in all these diverse areas of life. And it was like, it even got me to go deeper because I began to realize this is like an elixir. And there's a chemistry associated with that cuts through stress like a knife. I mean, it's unbelievable how many things, an enhancer of the immune system, and yet it's right there. It's free. You don't have to go to the pharmacy. You can just go right in and you can start bringing it in. And most people are not aware of it. So I agree with you, Jerry, that this is something that most people overlook, and it's so easy. And I see it as a muscle. The more you work it, the bigger it gets. And the more you don't go there, it just like any muscle, it starts to atrophy. And it should be this one of the, just like joy in your life and love in your life. I think gratefulness, if you anchor your life in gratefulness, I think you really can't go wrong.
Amen to that. Haley?
Yes, I have a story to share to put it all in practice, and it's this week. As we're recording, today's Friday, and I just spent Monday and Tuesday this week in a pretty high pressure situation for myself. I was asked to kind of be the lead of a 2-day workshop and 14-hour days. And it was a combination of working with 15 collegiate athletes, professional athletes as well, who were being mentors. And then I also went and did a keynote with, corporate execs in the evenings and then dinners. And I felt a lot of pressure. But to take what Dr. Loehr just said, I allowed myself to not just look at all the pressure and the fact that I have high expectations and want to do a good job, but how grateful I am for the opportunity
Mm.
Mm,
that they asked me, that I have given it my full heart. And there were moments I remember in my car driving from one activity to the next and having 4 wardrobe changes in the back of my car. And just for a moment smiling and saying to myself, like, what a cool opportunity, which from a performance perspective allowed me not to feel the anxiety of the pressure, but the
Yeah.
gratitude of the pressure.
mm,
And one lesson, Jim, you mentioned teaching gratitude at HPI, at the Human Performance Institute. It was a tactic to help us regulate our emotions.
exactly.
And one lesson that I do, and I did this with the 15 collegiate athletes that I was working with in one of the workshops, I asked them just to close their eyes and to think of something they're grateful for about themselves. And then after a moment, I asked, how would your answer have been different if I just asked you to be grateful? And of course, all the time, well, we would have said someone else or something else, never about themselves. And when we're feeling anxiety, fear, worry, frustration, anger, when we're feeling sad, deflated, exhausted, we want to be grateful, but let's put ourselves on that list as well. Be
Mm,
grateful for the things and people we have in our lives, but let's be grateful for ourselves. And then what we've seen is that helps us move from sadness to maybe more of a calm state, from fear to more maybe of a challenge state.
mhm.
So I love this conversation of gratitude.
Mm.
Great.
Gratitude comes in various forms and shapes and colors, just like people. And I was thinking the other day, and I said this to my wife Jan, who she's a thriving professional. She's a physician. she loves work, and she fell down and dislocated her shoulder and broke the bone. And so now, she's having a struggle. And 5 weeks into this situation, the thought came to me, you know, I'm really grateful that that happened. And people will look at me and say, "What are you talking about?" And I say, what I'm really grateful about is I can abstract from this an opportunity for me to raise my level of care, to raise my level of concern and love and giving and serving, which is really my whole purpose. I'll say that any day of the week, but if if I'm not into helping her to get through this rough time, uh, I'm losing an opportunity. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm not grateful that she's in pain, but I'm grateful that that pain gives her an opportunity to change her life and make it more congruent with the direction she's going, and it gives me the opportunity to be a better person, to be a better version of myself.
Mm.
And so gratefulness is always there. It's just a matter of what we choose uh, to look at and how we see it.
Yeah.
And so, talk about science, Jim. Let me just throw it right back at you. Uh, Science is now, as you well know, proven what we probably intuitively knew 30 years ago, and
Yeah.
that is feelings equal function.
Yeah.
You get up in the morning and you're feeling less than, and you're feeling depressed, and you're feeling like you don't matter and you're not important. That's not going to be a very good day for you. But Haley, like you turned it around, you're grateful for the opportunity. You get out of bed that morning and you say, yes, I have this opportunity. I'm feeling so much joy. I can't wait to get there and share what I've learned. You're going to have a very good day. So feelings equal function. And what's the feeling we're talking about? Gratitude, gratefulness. It's one of
Mhm.
the most potent, strongest feelings that a human being could experience. And all performance comes from how we're feeling.
Mm.
Exactly.
Um, Go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Billie Jean King said, pressure is a privilege.
Mm.
And, when you're in the midst, I'm sure you've all done this with your athletes. You've finally gotten to this crucible where you're really wondering whether you can actually perform at this level or you can move your mind and body in the right direction. There's so much at stake here. You'd never dreamed you'd be in this situation. And yet, when you reverse that and you go, how lucky, how fortunate am I to be here now? I've worked my whole life. The dominant emotion should be that I am so grateful for this opportunity. I'm going to do the best I can, but I've worked my life for this. And if I do great, if I don't, I'm still going to value this. I will abstract something from this, and it will be an important learning point for me for the rest of my life. I will be eternally grateful for this moment.
Mm. Yeah. It's incredible how powerful that is. And I love, that pressure is a privilege. And all these things fit into this concept of, I have to do this versus no, I get to do this, right? I get to perform on the biggest stage. I get to be grateful about this. And I think about Jim and both of you, you talk about this inner voice being our greatest coach,
Yes.
right? And that inner voice, how it approaches these sort of things, really has the greatest effect upon our performance, doesn't it? And I remember, Jim, I remember years ago, you were on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and I was listening to the interview, and I was skate skiing. Haley and I are big skiers, and I was skate skiing. And it's the farthest I've ever gone because I was listening to you talk to Tim Ferriss, and I looked up, and I was like, "Where the hell am I in the woods?" Right? But it was
I've
such
had
a
that effect on a lot of people.
where the hell am I? Yeah.
Where
So,
am I? Who the hell am I?
where the hell am? What has he done to me? But I remember that, and I took when we were getting ready for this. I just told Jerry this. I had I was stopping skiing and taking notes on my like Apple Notes, and I had like pages and pages of notes of this conversation. And there was something you said in that really hit me that I think brings us all together. You said, how would you speak to the person that you care about the most in your life?
Right.
Because that's how your inner voice should speak to you. And
Yep.
how often does our inner voice speak to us in a much more damaging way? So I'm just curious if you want to just talk about that for a bit, because that literally stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah, this has been an evolutionary process for me. It was nothing that I, learned in school or graduate studies. But at the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy, I was director of sports science and director of sports psychology, and I had all these great athletes, Andre Agassi and David Wheaton and Jim Courier and on and on and on. And I loved telemetry, so I had them all wired up every day, and I would ask them to verbalize outwardly with their outward voice, with their regular voice, what they were thinking and what they were saying to themselves during that particular moment. And so, they would try to articulate in the moment what coaching advice they were giving themselves in that situation. And then we would bring them in, and I had that all recorded, and we'd bring it all the way down, and I'd say, "This is the best coaching you could give yourself in this difficult situation." And they would be blown away. "You idiot, what the hell's the matter with you? I hate this game. What time is lunch today? God, I never do anything right." And I said, "This is the best advice. This is the most important coach you'll ever have in your life. And you have to understand that that coaching resonates at some level inside you. It's the closest you're ever going to get to that big prefrontal cortex and to that subcortical region that we call emotion." And so we started working at that, and it had such a transformational impact that I began to do more and more work in it. And all my work now, it's very much around this notion of the power that is for the most part, a lot of the athletes out, they were moving air inside their heads. What they said to themselves didn't really matter. And so we made this maybe the centerpiece of everything was the way in which they talked to themselves and the script. So they began to script it in advance. I had people do a lot of journaling, and that was the way in which they want to speak to themselves. And the basic format was should be the way you would speak to your best friend or someone you cared about in exactly the same situation. And it changed the tone and the content immediately. And all of a sudden, they felt they were on the same team. They weren't fighting themselves. They had a force on the inside. It was actually with the same mission, and that was to do the very best you can, just like you would be doing for a great friend. So,
I love that so much.
That sort
Haley,
of that sort
yeah.
of goes in
Oh,
hand, John. I'm thinking uh, your book, Jim, The Power of Story.
yeah.
I love that book. And stories mean so much to me. I try to create my story often. And talk a little bit about that, will you? And perhaps, Haley, you can jump in with this as well, because I know that's something that's really dear to your heart as well.
Well, share Yoda too, Jim. Your Yoda.
Oh, yeah, Yoda. So, you know, I'll start with this notion of story. I began to realize, you all have these amazing backgrounds. I got involved in kind of a little bit of a crazy area of science, and it was called brainwashing. Because I was curious, how could someone steal your brain? And if there were principles involved, I want to know, could you ever use those for self-indoctrination? So I got involved in this indoctrination process. And I went deep into that literature as much as I could find. And the most helpful was a book by Ed Winters, and it was called Brainwashing. And he did interviews with all the um, people who were involved in this Mao Zedong takeover, where they wanted to brainwash millions of the Chinese people into believing, number one, that religion is horrible, particularly Christianity, to endorse Soviet-style communism, and to hate anything American. And they had this system that was so intriguing to me. And they used writing. They found that writing was the best way. Even if you didn't believe it, they had them write over. It was called Idea School. And they wrote over and over and over again. And then that would be graded, and they would have to pass that, or they had to go back and do it again week after week. But the most interesting thing was that they found that they had to grade it for sincerity. They felt that once they rallied this sincerity, they captured you. They had your inner voice, and they believed your inner voice really ran the show. And so they would read each and every article after the ideas were presented and scored on two levels. One, for accuracy of content, and the other was for sincerity of message. And when they had the sincerity, they had you. And they concluded, Ed Winters concluded that everyone, almost without exception, is vulnerable to indoctrination under the right principles. So I said, let's just see what writing does. So at the Institute, we began to develop all this writing, and we developed this notion of really getting the person to really put themselves in a way that it was like, you know, this is who I really am at the core, and this is what I want to manifest. And the mission that they were on had to be graded in that context. And that was, again, the Institute for me was a living laboratory for learning. And Yoda, and I'll just move on here because Yoda, I wrote a book with Sheila Walker Olson, who's has a PhD in behavioral genetics, brilliant, brilliant woman. And we wanted to really do a deep dive in decision making. And in order to really make a good decision, you have to have something you reference. And this took us back into the inner voice. And we all have our own decision advisor, which is your Yoda. It's not the Yoda of Star Wars, but there are a lot of similarities. And that caught on with kids. They love it. What does your Yoda say here? And the Yoda has been uploaded with all these important documents about who you want to be, your best self, your deepest values, what mission, your tombstone, all the things that matter most to you. And Yoda is your inner voice advising you in situations that really matter. So it all keeps coming back to the importance of this critical space between your ears. And Jerry, you're in this I think, a wonderful way because you really realize the power of emotion. Emotion runs the show. And we have this capacity for logic and reason, but we need to get the whole person involved. If we get it right and we get emotion in the story, we are storytellers first and foremost. Everything in our life is a story. What I'm saying to you now is my story, and we all have our story. And that story can be true, false, or completely nutty. And so we're always for me, it's always a challenge to make sure that my story is aligned with the real world, which I believe does exist, and is aligned with what I care about most, my values. And when you get all that going, it's like quite magical in terms of you're able to do things you never believed you could do because your whole person is involved and you lead that with how you feel.
Mm.
Jim, John, I have to jump in here. I I'm so glad you pointed this out. I haven't heard many people say it so eloquently, and I mean that with my heart, explaining this particular situation. You know, as sports psychologists, we're and I don't think I'm a sports psychologist, but I do sports psychology work. We're taught that you go into a team situation, and what you do essentially is you disseminate information. You give them ways, strategies, tools, techniques. When a coach says, I want my kids to be mentally strong, when indeed it has nothing to do with that. I'm not saying that's not important. I mean, you and I, all three of us, four of us, we've written books that illustrate the importance of a good mental strategy.
Sure.
It is important, but without what you're saying, that mental strategy doesn't matter because if internally you are criticizing yourself and you're getting down on yourself, or worse still, if you're in an environment, a team environment where it's not safe, where if you fail, you're castigated. If you lose, you're blamed. If you're not in a safe environment where you could feel that power and learn from your mistakes and failure and setbacks, what's going to happen is all those mental strategies won't be worth their weight in gold. And so we have to have, it seems to me that we have to have a setup where we feel safe to explore. We want to become, as Michael Murphy once said, astronauts of inner space.
Mm,
And inner space isn't not necessarily the head, it's the soul. It's the gut feeling. It's the feeling, what you intuitively feel is your story, what's right for you, what works for you. And that's emotional.
yeah.
And that goes really, really, really deep. And um, if I can, I just want to tell a brief story. I was working with the University of Maryland women's lacrosse team. Got hired back there in 1996. We won a national championship. And the next year, all the pressure was on. We have to repeat. We have to do this. And the stories, get back to the idea of story, the media headlines in the sports page in the Baltimore Sun, uh, Terps on the edge of defeat, must-win game in the semifinal, all of this pressure. And the team was talking about this. And I stopped them on the bus. This is on the bus. The bus kept going, but I stopped them from just thinking. And I said to them, these are stories. What story do you want to write? And what story do you want to live? But it's got to come from you inside. No external thoughts, people, whatever. Silence that. And I said, do one page, one one piece of paper, and write your story. And every one of those kids, 36 kids on that bus, spent the next 45 minutes writing the story. But the real power of that story was that evening before the game on the next day, we all sat around in a circle and we read the stories out loud to each other. The
Mm,
power in that room was off the charts. It was palpable. You could feel as we went from story to story how they were changing their whole way of how they were going to show up. They were listening to their inner Yoda, as you would say.
yeah,
They
exactly.
were believing themselves because everyone had a really good story around how we want to be, not what we need to do. And it was all about being. And we went on to win that championship. And then we won five more, all consecutively, seven consecutive championships. And I think to this day, and I still do this, and John does it. I've talked to John about this many times. We still use this idea of writing the story coming from inside your gut, what you really feel, and go out and demonstrating it, being being the story that you're writing,
Yeah.
right?
Haley,
That's
what's your inner Yoda telling you right now?
Oh, so so much. But I'm thinking about all the athletes that I'm working with right now, and also executives, and these mental and emotional fork in the roads. And some of the choice of stories that we're looking at right now is the challenge of competition or the threat of social comparison.
Mm.
what must happen versus what can happen.
Mm,
The striving to be perfect or striving to be the best recoverer. So we make a mistake, next shot mentality, next shot mentality. And it's an interesting thing because when we're actually performing, the results tend to dictate what our confidence is going to be. And what I've learned from Jim is the power of purpose and character and identity. That's one of the greatest lessons. And I have my purpose to shine a bright light on all of our strengths so that we can be the champions of our life, full of love, health, and adventure. And I can say that to you so easily because how many times I've written it down and because of how many times I've looked at that story. And with all of these stories that I just created, something that I'm doing my best to work on with everyone that I'm coaching is that after your competition, after your performance, let's evaluate, not judge, but let's evaluate our performance on two levels. And one, obviously, it's the results because that's the world in which we live. But equally, if not more important, what Jerry just said is, did I show up the way I intended?
Mm,
Did I bring my story to life while I was performing? Because that gives us unshakable confidence. That allows us to feel in control when the results don't always do that for us.
mhm. Yeah. And Jim, this kind of brings down to this idea of success versus fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
That if I'm only chasing the podium today or the win on the weekend, society says, "Oh, look at that success," but you're never fulfilled. And I think, some of the athletes, you talk about Andre Agassi and working with him, and certainly he's been very open in his book, open about his story, and just sort of the lack of fulfillment for so long, chasing after something. So I think this is a good little segue into that. Like, what define these two things, success versus fulfillment, and why fulfillment is really the goal or the purpose.
So again, this was an evolutionary process for me. I didn't understand it in my early years, but we began to realize, and we put this into the most important place at the Institute, that the more I called it your hidden scorecard. We are social creatures. And if it's all about you, and it's all about you attaining all these extrinsic markers of success, society tells us that, you know, your success as a human being will largely be reflected in your achievements, awards, degrees, and everything else. And that's, in a sense, parents get caught up in that, and they believe that their success as a parent is how high achieving their children are in these extrinsic markers of success. So I've had the privilege of working with 17 number ones in the world, and many of them were some of the most unfulfilled people I have met.
Mm,
And so we began to dig into this, and we began to, as did Andre Agassi. He was told in his own words that he would become happy, he would be fulfilled as a human being if he had the money, the fame, and all that, and none of it came true. And so he repurposed his life away from himself. We call it a self-transcendent purpose, where it really is never about us. It's about what we can do for others. And that takes us back to our earliest beginnings. That's how people survived. That's where all caring and support and trust and integrity. If you didn't have that in your group, in your tribe, or in your unit, whether it's a military unit, you're on serious peril. So fulfillment that we learned from all the data we collected from over 400,000 people was that the way in which you define your mission, your life, and if it's all about you, you're likely, even if you achieve a lot, you may feel a sense of emptiness. Is this all there is? And so for me, I'm always trying to push, why are you here? Why are you born? What do you want on your tombstone? do you want 4 Olympic medals? That was the thing. I said, oh, how you want to be remembered? And I do this. I've done it literally with thousands, as you guys have, with all your clients and so forth. And it is so shocking, particularly if you're in a group and they all look at, well, none of them put any of these extrinsic markers on their carved into their gravestone. That what they wanted was their connection to other people, a loving person, kind, inspirational, a extraordinary mother, father. And, it was like we are wired in one way to achieve, and in another way, if we want to have real fulfillment, we've got to get outside of ourselves. We are really, it's not about us, it's about what we can do to make the world a better place. And one of the things that you mentioned that Yannick Sinner, who's #1 in the world right now in tennis, if you listen to what he's saying about how he handles pressure, and this relates back to what he was saying, he always says the same thing, and it's totally sincere. He says, I'm really not here. My goal is really not to win the championship. I mean, I'm here to win the championship, to win Wimbledon or the US Open. I want to become a better person. I want to learn. I want to keep getting better. And I want to be able to say, this was, what really helped me this tournament. Even if I lost, I feel like I've covered some new ground with myself, and I'm better as an example for other kids, an inspiration for others. And, his parents put no pressure. They don't even know how to play tennis. And yet, so many parents who've watched something like that, they misinterpret his passion for excellence is not driven to win at all costs, but to learn at all costs and get better and try to understand how he can extend beyond himself to a much bigger world. And all of a sudden, something magically happens, and all these adrenal cortical hormones that are pumped in around stress and angst and everything else, they start dissipating because there's no fear. I can always try to get better. And I love competition. I am so grateful for this opportunity. If I win, if it's great. If I don't, and watch him after he loses a close match against Carlos Alcaraz. It's like he's not devastated. And, Roger Federer would say, I learned a lot today. I'm so enthralled. I just have a love affair with the game. And I feel so grateful for the opportunity to play someone who can teach me something.
Hmm.
So there's this getting outside your skin and using this as a leverage for learning extraordinary things that without which you would never learn about yourself. So, and it's not about you. It's about what you can do for others.
Haley, I see you nodding there,
Like,
and yeah, I want you to say something. And Jim, as you said that, I was just thinking about Scotty Scheffler this
Yeah.
summer, right? Like the picture of him after winning a major with his little kid, and he's like, "Do you think he cares that I just won a major? He just cares that it's dad, right?" And that's it right there.
If I recall, and Haley, I've got you right here. If I recall at the when I watched that and he was finished, he had a lot of pushback from his quote unquote attitude of not really caring, like what's wrong with him,
Hmm.
as if something were defective. Haley, go ahead,
He
take
got
it.
it right, and
no,
everybody else is wrong.
Yeah, right?
I think the quote, Jerry, and I wanted to jump on both Scotty Scheffler and Yannick Sinner, what they said. I think the quote was, "What's the point?"
Yeah.
Scotty Scheffler said, all this, what's the point? And he said, listen, it's his, I mean, it is his job. That's how he supports his family. He loves golf. But at the end of the tournament, he goes home and what's for dinner, right? What's for dinner, Dad? And so it was just embracing that fulfillment. And then back to Dr. Loehr, what you were saying about Yannick Sinner, when he lost to Carlos at the US Open this past year, I watched, it was so interesting to hear what he said because he said two things that resonated. One was he said Carlos was the better player today.
Yep.
So he said today, right? And then he said, why? And then he started talking about how Carlos was a more unpredictable player. And then he shared, so for me, I have to decide if I want to go and learn to be more of an unpredictable player. And the best part is, he said, that may cost me some wins in the future. That may actually make me lose some while I'm learning and growing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's okay if I lose because I'm learning and growing to be a better player. And all of that together makes these athletes
In fact,
tremendous.
everything that the four of us have in common is that we are where we are with all of our books, with all of our clients, and all of the work we do. We are who we are because of our setbacks, failures, mistakes, and errors. And raise your hand if you don't believe me. And no one's going to raise their hand because that's exactly where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think of Tiger Woods changing his swing after winning majors and everyone going, "What the heck are you doing? You just won the US Open." And he's like, "Because I want to, I want to learn and get better." And maybe I don't think as a golfer would say I want to be more unpredictable, but like I want to be able to do more things or create more shots or whatever. Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you always enter the most serious territory when your identity as a person becomes connected to something you don't control. So you don't control winning, you don't control the score, you don't control so many things in the sport. And if you become very fragile when you're only as good as your last performance. And that was not something you can control your attitude, your effort, your mindset around this whole thing, and how you frame what it is why are you doing this? What is the end point here? And if you really want to use this extraordinary experience to become a better human being as you define it, a more character driven, more focused, more more other centered, then this will change the dynamics of everything you do in the practice court and how you actually perform in the most important moments. That was a very long, hard slog for me to get that clarity in my head. And I feel like I wish I'd had these insights a lot sooner in my career. But I'm like all of you, I'm a data guy. I love to look at what's happening. And we had this fabulous data center. And that's all I did was look at the incoming data. We had so much, we took a blood, a big, comprehensive blood panel, put people in a bod pod for lean body mass. We measured everything we could. And then we tried to look at outcomes and where people ended up as a consequence of their storytelling, changing their purpose. And so, we're all a work in progress. Most importantly, me.
It's scary. I bought your book, Jim, Leading with Character, when it came out 2020, 2021, something like that. And it also had this companion book. Was it The Personal Credo or something like that? Am I saying that correctly? Yeah. And it sat on my night. I told Haley the story. We had lunch in Colorado a couple months ago, and it sat on my nightstand a long time, and I had to stare at it every night and then not do it because it's scary work
Very,
sometimes to dive into this stuff because you go to some tough places.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
It's also pressure and responsibility to live up to the purpose that you create for yourself. But I think from where I sit, my purpose, it's good pressure. It's pressure that I want to have. And I can't use pressure as a privilege because that's Billie Jean King's, but I actually think of it as pressure is not the enemy, it's the invitation.
Hmm.
And I now have an invitation to show up with my purpose. So yes, it's hard. And yes, it then, then you have this responsibility to, but I look at it as something that anchors me when I'm not feeling my best and fuels me when I am feeling my best.
mhm.
And I can show up and the results then
Yeah.
take care of themselves.
Yeah. As John said, it's scary to dive into Jim's book on the night table. What immediately went off in my mind is I think it's scary not to dive into that book.
Right.
What is that going to do for us? And how are we going to evolve as human beings? And that gets back to what is our purpose and what is our meaning? I often tell people I'm not in, I could retire. Jim, I'm sure you could too at our age. But
I'm very tired.
what?
Retired is to be tired twice.
That's right. Retired. Well, I tell people I'm not going to retire. I'm going to rewire and refire.
Good for
And
you.
and that's the way I have to look at it. But where was I going with that? Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's scary not to examine our life that's worth living and to do the work we're doing. It's not really about, to some degree, we have to make a living. I mean, I'm enjoying the results of making a very fine living over all these years. But really, the bottom line, what cuts all through of that is it gets back to character, who I am, my integrity. And my
Right.
integrity shows up like I'm here not to make a living, I'm here to make a difference. And as long as I keep that carrot out in front of me and say, am I making a difference today? I'm on the right track. But if I'm worried about, like, am I going to get paid enough for this talk? Or am I being undercut for this reason? That completely throws me into a whole different realm emotionally. And how can I serve people unless I really truly want to give and make a difference?
Mhm.
So it's more than words, it's actually a feeling. And it gets back to, I think, us all getting in touch with why, the why, the Simon Sinek concept of why and why we're being the way we are. And to get in touch with that deeply. Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to say so much of it is just getting your scorecard right.
Yeah.
How you score a particular sport. If you change one thing in golf or you change one thing, changes the game. And what we want to do is get the scorecard right that's actually going to take us, I say, getting us home. Home is ending up at the end of your life where you want to end up. And you're going to have to work hard to get there. Getting home is really what everyone wants. And I start with the end in mind, as we've talked about, uh, and work backwards. And that helps you to get the scorecard right. That actually, where for me, it's all about where you invest your energy. Energy is what spawns growth, and to be much more intentional about what you're investing your energy in. And the more you want something to happen, the more you're going to have to invest. Energy is nothing more than effort, but it's intentional investment of consciously of the thing that I believe makes us human beings, and that is we are reservoirs of potential energy, and we want to convert that to kinetic energy and all this mitochondria, all the energy in the cells of the body. We want to direct that energy into things that matter. And if you have the right scorecard, you're investing well, and you have to recover your energy and you have to expend it with great intelligence, or even the best plans will get foiled. So I do a lot of my work around stress and recovery, energy in and energy out, aligned with what matters most to you.
Mm. And energy that you get coming from a place of love, coming from a place of gratitude, coming from a place of optimism is so much stronger than fear, hate, scarcity, whatever it is.
100%. Each one of those emotions has its own energy signature. And all of those emotions, all that represents is an underlying psychophysiological chemical balance. And those can change, like cortisol levels can change literally instantly. That hypothalamic pituitary, uh, axis can alter, how we think, our brainwave patterns, what the muscle tension levels in our arms and hands, whether we're feeling a sense of dread or joy or happiness. And that's all because there's an underlying chemistry associated with every emotion. And we're trying to get those emotions that actually free us to become, who we want to become and must become to actually be fulfilled fully in our mission to have the life we want to have.
Hmm. Amen.
And you could, uh, I think the listener needs to know that this isn't some conversation that takes place in intergalactic bliss. You know,
Speak
it's
for
not, it's,
yourself, Garrett.
it, it might sound that way, but this is getting back to the science of this.
Science. Mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, both of you, but I deeply believe in the work that I'm doing that I can help people to transport themselves to gratefulness, to high level, elevated emotions by using a process I don't call it visualization, I call it feelingization. You can actually feel the difference when you feel gratefulness versus you just sort of say, I'm grateful. Like, what does it feel when you're grateful? How do you feel when you're feeling these elevated emotions? And then we go off and we could list all the elevated emotions that we're talking about, and actually in a state of like an alpha state where we start doing our meditation, or we take deep breathing exercises, and we actually say to ourselves, feel what it feels like to be grateful, feel what it feels like to be honored, to be whatever the feeling is, that I believe that imprints in our nervous system, our central nervous system, the message about how we want to function. And to leave that to chance means any emotions can come in. And, all emotions will lead to certain kinds of behavior. Feelings equal function. And so I want to encourage the listeners out there to take what you just said, Jim, and say, you know what? I can do something about that. I can actually close my eyes and take a few deep breaths and feel the way I want to feel, and feel love and feel caring and connection and feel important and relevant and feel like we're respected. And what does that feel like? And feel like you're prepared. Haley, when you walk into that room, that to feel your level of preparation is so powerful. And so I want people to get that, because otherwise you walk away. Well, it's great for those guys and that woman to be talking about this, but no, there's something they can do right now about it.
Yeah, it's strategy.
Haley,
Yeah, no, thanks, Jerry. I look at it too as science and strategy, and listening to you speak, feeling as function. One thing that or another thing that I'm helping athletes realize, because I'm working with a lot of golfers right now, collegiate golfers, and one girl yet last week asked, "Is it okay if I have emotions?" Because we're told we're not supposed to have emotions. And I was trying to work it out, and I said, I think there's a difference between being an emotional player and playing with emotion. One, maybe you're not, like you said, leaving it to chance. And another one is you're doing these exercises to feel gratitude and to feel challenged instead of fear. And then using that to go and focus in on your game. But I do believe it comes back to the power of story, because our thoughts is one of the greatest ways, tools, if you will, to regulate our emotions. Our thoughts influence our emotions. Our emotions then impact our body, our heart rate, our muscle tension, skin conductance, all the chemicals and hormones, and then that influences our behavior, our performance. And so if we can get our heads straight, if we can get our thoughts and our stories to then help us regulate those emotions and go out there and use our emotions, to the best of our advantages, then our bodies and our performance, come together.
Well,
It's so powerful.
I think Haley and Jim, either one of you can take this. It's not about not having emotions, right? It's about experiencing all those emotions and still and having the capacity to still take action, to still take positive action no matter what's happening around you, right? It's not like someone with a 3-foot putt to win the Masters isn't feeling anything, you know. I mean, the only athlete that I've ever seen, and I don't know if you've, I imagine Haley has, but that movie Free Solo, where Alex Honnold climbing free soloing El Capitan, and they're doing brain scans on him, and like his brain's just not normal. It doesn't fire when there's fear and scary things. So unless you have something like that, we all feel something there. He apparently doesn't feel anything.
So John, I love that you brought that up because outside of that movie, I've heard him speak, and he says that free soloing, climbing, fear, maybe he doesn't, his amygdala isn't firing off because he's not experiencing a lot of fear. And he says, why? Because I have visualized or feelized, to go with Jerry, and he has practiced and prepared.
Yeah.
So his level of confidence kind of conquers, kind of pushes down the fear. But I don't think he's a new dad anymore. But when he became a new dad, he goes, I wish you would have taken measurements of my amygdala then, because fear was off the charts.
Yeah, to quote a famous athlete, Michael Jordan, he once went over to the bench and told Phil Jackson, this is after Phil initiated a lot of meditation into the group. He even had a room called the Warrior Room, not the Worrier Room. And in that room, he brought people in to meditate and what have you. He went over to the bench and he said, and pardon my expression, he said, "This shit really works." And that's a true statement. And what he's referring to is the preparation. Even Michael Jordan at that level needed to have some way of self-control, of getting his emotions aligned with the level of play. And what he would do is feel the way he wanted to play and then go into action, and the feelings will be the function that he's demonstrating. And so everything we're saying is spot on, even at the highest level, like in Alex Hano. I mean, yeah, it takes time, it takes work, it takes effort, but it's scary not to take that time. That's what's scary. And the alternative, uh to me, over the years working with people, so many people, the alternative isn't pretty, and it's disastrous. And so people crave what we're all saying here today, but they just don't know they crave it, and they're trying to figure a way through the obstacle rather than let the obstacle be the way, be a way of allowing them to discover inner greatness that perhaps they would never discover without opening up to these kind of concepts and ideas. That's the value of what we're doing today, I see.
Mm. And this all this discussion and this hidden scorecard and what do you want in your tombstone and thinking about the other and our influence on others. I had a friend who was one of the cameramen on Free Solo, and he said, "Yeah, Alex Honnold didn't feel fear, but all of us was miserable. Like every
Yeah,
one of them was like, I'm never doing anything like that again."
yeah,
Because of their love of their friend and not wanting to see anything happen to him. So,
yeah.
I'll bring it to a close here. I want to finish Haley first, you,
Oh.
and then Jim. I want to give you the last word. Any final thoughts, ideas, something you wish we asked you, Haley, that you want to just leave our listeners with?
I just want to share one thing because, Jim and Jerry, you both said looking back on your careers and took you a while to learn this.
Mm.
I'm fortunate because I get to learn it from you. And I don't, and I can utilize it right now. And so anyone listening, let's not, we have such great leaders and mentors, John and I, we can learn from these two. And John, in our, short friendship, I've also learned so much from you, putting the play back in playing sports, for example. Like those are really strong messages. And so I would love our listeners to remember that you have all, like, carved the way, carved the path. You've spared me from years of having to learn it through experience and data. You're telling me, I trust you, and I'm going to use it for myself, and I'm going to pay it forward and pass it along. And so I think that's just a really valuable message. And the lessons that we've talked about today, to go to what Jerry said, there is strategy, there is technique, there are tools. We don't just have to wait to learn the lesson. We can actually engage in some training
Mm.
and to get our stories right, to get our purpose, and then lead with that. So thank you for having me. This is such an honor
Mhm.
Yeah,
to
but
be with the three of you.
the thing you need to remember, and I mean this from my heart, is that I'm looking at you and listening to you and learning, but more than anything, you are so freaking far ahead of me when I was your age that, for you to be speaking at your age the way you are, I can't imagine what it's going to be like in 30, 35 years from now. So you need to see that trajectory. And then you're the mentor for others coming your way and they're looking up to you. Imagine where they're going to be if they're relating to where you're at. Anyway, you need to just think about that for a minute.
I'm feeling the joy, Jerry. Feeling the emotion.
Yeah.
Jim, last word, last thoughts.
I would say, someone like Haley is truly on a fast track. A lot of this information is out there, but her dedication, her passion to get better, she wants to get better for others, and she's not going to be denied. And where she is in her career compared to where I was in my career, same age, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you're on the fast track, and I think there'll be so many great things, and all you have to do is to continue to learn and keep that wonderful spirit alive of your enthusiasm and your excitement for this area of training. It's incredible. I opened my career with a 2-year research project, and I came up with this notion of one's ideal performance state. And I interviewed people from 21 different sports and tried to figure, and they would use the descriptors that actually most accurately reflected how they felt, really feelings when they were performing at their best. And that opened the door. That was mental toughness training for sport really early when there was not much out there. And that kind of paved a path for me to understand how really what it's all about. That ideal performance state is mental, it's physical, it's emotional. It actually connects to what you've eaten, how much practice you've done, visualization. We're an integrated system. But we can be trained, and what we're ultimately training is this internal chemistry. We're trying to get this balance, this psychophysiological balance. It's hard work, but you can change how you respond in every situation. Every situation can be viewed as a meta moment for learning. You can learn a little bit more about yourself, about what it means to be in the crucible of stress. And I think for the rest of our lives, that's all we can do. And so, I've really enjoyed this opportunity to listen to all three of you. It's been it's been a career for all of us that I was literally intoxicated when I got into this field. I was in the mental health field. I was chief psychologist and executive director of a large community mental health center that served the whole central and southern part of Colorado. And when I began to apply psychology to human performance, I went into another stratosphere. I mean, I feel like I am the most fortunate, grateful that I could carve out a career in this. And I never want to stop learning. And I am grateful for all those people in the trenches who keep pounding out more insight, more science. And I'm trying to integrate it in whatever way I can. But all three of you have done a remarkable job, and it's been a real privilege to be on the same podcast with all three of you.
Mm. Jim, Haley, thank you both of you so very much for being on the Way of Champions. This was phenomenal. Whenever I look at the clock and say, "Oh man, we're past time," and I hadn't looked yet, that's always a good sign. So thank you both on behalf of Jerry and I for being on the Way of Champions. This was amazing.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you both of you so much.
Jerry, I'm feeling pretty elevated after that discussion right there. Well, once again, we wrote a lot of questions. I think we asked one of them or two.
Yeah, maybe.
And what a conversation. That was incredible.
Yeah, it just went into places we never dreamed possible. Well, maybe we dreamed possible, but this whole thing about you know, Jim and Haley, they're unusual. I'm familiar with the the science of sports psychology, and they're beyond sports psychology. And even though they use that as a moniker, but this idea of a scorecard and getting home, I like that because it starts from the end and it works its way forward. Well, what most people are doing is they're starting from here and they're trying to work forward and seeing what the end result is. But if you actually see what your gravestone, and that image kept coming up, although I don't like it, whatever you write on your a gravestone, and if you come back from that and you set up your life now to demonstrate all of those things that you're visualizing and feeling you would like to be, uh, that gives you an extreme advantage. And so I like that analogy. That was one of my big takeaways from that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and maybe it's not a tombstone. Maybe it's like my daily legacy, right? And
Yeah,
at the end of the day, did I give to someone that I didn't need to give to? Did I
yeah,
show love? Did I show
yeah,
kindness? Did
yeah,
I pour into others? Like anything that you might put on there. But
yeah,
then that's your checklist at the end of the day. Like name
yeah,
one person I did this to, name one person I did this to.
yeah.
If you're doing that every day, you're going to be okay, and you're going to have again fulfillment, right? Not just a
Well, how,
trophy or two.
how about this for our listeners? So, how do you want to be remembered by people that you just influenced this past week? Next month, how do you want to be remembered? They're going to be talking about you. And now the second question, more importantly, is what are you doing today to make sure that happens?
Exactly.
you know and so
Exactly.
we can control it, so they, I'm going through a week with or 5 days with you and our group, our cohort up in Colorado mountains. How do I want to be remembered in a month from now, and what am I doing now to make sure I'm remembered that way? This way it's like we can continue to grow. It's not the end, it's the beginning. And
And
yeah,
when we like we still have all these connections to that cohort we worked with last year and our cohort for next year, or this year coming up, and it's like no one talks about, oh, remember that information you gave me? They talk
yeah,
about the feeling. I want to get
yeah,
that feeling back
yeah,
of being in
yeah.
that room, of being in the mountains, of being so connected
Hmm.
and open and vulnerable and all this sort of stuff.
Hmm.
That's what it's all about. And I'm so
Yeah.
glad we went down that
Oh,
that
yeah.
whole
Yeah, me too.
path today of
Yeah.
the elevated emotions and the
Yeah.
feelings and
And
breaking down. I mean, just I didn't realize he had done all the research on the science of gratitude.
yeah, yeah. And that's wonderful to hear. And it's nice to have people out there doing that background stuff, because it just it affirms everything you and I are doing. When I'm talking about feelings equal function, there's science behind that. It's definitely proven that as you get out of bed in the morning, that's how you're going to function that whole day, unless you do something to change it. And you can change it at that moment. And so we have power. We have power to influence who? Ourselves. We can influence who we are, how we're being. But we're not doing that. We're trying to influence others. We're trying to be, you know, maybe who we're not. So we have these tools available to us, and it's screaming out to us that you can take charge. You get up in the morning, you have a full day of work. How do you want to be? You can influence that by the way you're feeling, and get those feelings going inside your nervous system. And before you know it, you're out there and you're being exactly the way you want to be.
Amen.
It's
Whew.
fascinating.
What a great podcast, Jerry. So glad we
Yeah.
we got to do that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, listen, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you to Sprocket Sports. Thank you to all of you out there who've gotten bulk orders of the Champion Teammate, Champion Sports Parent, Win the Day, Every Moment Matters, Lead with Love, all the books that help us put this out. Our Patreon podcast champions, we truly appreciate all your incredible support. If you really want to support us, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen on, share it with someone, leave a review. Tell one or two or three people if you really enjoyed this episode. Send it to them. That's how we really spread our influence, right? So,
Hmm.
and your influence is never neutral this week, is it, Jerry?
Ever,
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 ever, ever.
ever, ever. Yeah.
So go out, use it
Thank you,
for
John.
good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. We'll see you
Yeah.
again next week, everybody.